Good evening, I'm Melissa Ridgen with your APTN News Weekend. Starting off in southwestern Nova Scotia, where Sableville lobster fishers obtained an injunction that's been posted at checkpoints at the Sableville Wharf. It orders the RCMP to do their job after a month of violence against the Migma fishers by non-Indigenous commercial fishers. Angel Moore is there.
This injunction obtained by Sableville First Nation is clear. No person can interfere with band members' fishing activity, nor block access to the Sableville Wharf, Weymouth Wharf, and the Lobster Pound at New Edinburgh, or harass, threaten, or intimidate. Any violations will result in an arrest. Sableville community member Robert Siliboy, whose boat burned a few weeks ago, is cautious.
Now that we have this injunction in place, I guess I feel a little more at ease, but we've experienced a lot of empty words, and even with the court injunction, it's going to be hard to believe until we can see.
The violence started a month ago when Sableville launched their moderate livelihood fishery, upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada in 1999, known as the Marshall Decision. The Migma have a treaty right to hunt, fish, and gather to earn a moderate livelihood. Non-Indigenous fishermen say the lobster stock is at risk and have violently attacked the Migma. Siliboy hopes the violence is over.
A lot of more smiles today than there was in the previous days, so I think people feel a little more sense of security now that we know that the law enforcement has to stand up and charge those accountable for breaking the law.
The interim injunction is in place until December 15th, and a hearing will be held if still required. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Sableville Wharf, Nova Scotia.
In Ottawa, a government committee on fisheries met Wednesday night to discuss the Migma lobster crisis. The discussion explored conservation concerns and government inaction regarding the Migma fishing rights. Here's Jamie Pashagumskum.
The commercial fishers say their main concern is simple: conservation.
It's never appropriate to fish in a lobster breeding ground during the closed season because of that. The lobsters are soft, shelled at that time, and really susceptible to damage.
Alison Bernard of the Migma Rights Initiative says that's why they need a Migma-developed management plan.
We are nature's conservationists. We are the only life that they do have. As I respect the elder, Albert Marshall, who is a neighbor of mine, has always said, you have to speak on behalf of the species because they can't speak for themselves.
Shelley Denny is a researcher and marine doctoral student at Dalhousie University. She also says traditional Migma knowledge is essential.
Let's take that opportunity to use shared values of governance to explore how they can coexist and employ innovation to address values that are unique to each perspective.
A common theme between all parties is the government's perceived inability to remedy the dispute. At one point, Liberal MP Jaime Batiste challenged Sproul on his interpretation of the Marshall decision, when Sproul said the Department of Fisheries has regulatory power over the Migma, and the ensuing crisis is a result of that inaction.
And so, Colin, you feel that it's the government's fault, but we are seeing vigilante justice, the cuttings of traps. Do you think that's a right way to handle this situation? Do you condemn the cutting of traps and what has happened in that area?
I condemn violent acts of any kind, and as well as sending any kind of fishing equipment to the bottom of the ocean. I don't think any sustainability-minded fisherman would ever be advocating for something like that.
The witnesses said to resolve the dispute, trust must be restored in governance, competition between fisheries needs to be minimized, and people require more education on treaty rights. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A handful of high-end restaurants in Montreal have pulled lobster off their menus to show solidarity with the Migma after a Mohawk woman from Ganawage asked them to. Ganawage and Ganasatake both mobilized quickly in support of Migma fishers, even staging a rolling blockade over the last weekend. But Garan Nahawe Goodleaf wanted to take it one step further, taking cues from restaurants in Halifax. She asked several Montreal-based eateries to stop selling settler-caught lobster. Joe Beef chef David McMillan says all 5 of his restaurants stand in support. Chef Chuck Hughes is doing the same at his restaurant, Garde Manger.
To me, there's always a way to show some type of support, whether it's just sharing articles or even calling restaurants yourself try to get involved. I had a lot of people from my community message me saying that they were willing to help to call different restaurants too to get on board, so they could have so there could be more people reaching out to different restaurants, and I thought that was really cool.
For Migma fishers continues to spread west across the country, with organizers from Idle No More calling for a national week of action to support the fishers. APTN's Brittany Hobson was at a Winnipeg rally.
The solidarity event for Migma fishers was organized by several Indigenous organizations in Manitoba. The day started at RCMP headquarters in the city, where leaders and horse spirit riders smudged and blessed the horses that joined in the solidarity event. The riders and then leadership marched from RCMP headquarters to the Legislative Building, where they were greeted by about 150 supporters. 10-year-old Mark Sweeney was one of them. The young Cree boy had this message for Migma.
If you're Mi'kmaq, fight for your nation and always stick up.
Non-Indigenous people were also there to support Migma fishers.
Canada doesn't get to be Canada without respecting the treaties. The treaties allow Canadians to be here and exist on this land in kinship on land that isn't theirs. And so not respecting this part of the bargain is just so profoundly ignorant and misinformed and unjust.
Indigenous people need protection, and they're not seeing that at all from the RCMP.
The crowd heard many impassioned pleas from leadership. Manitoba Kuwitanawi Ogimaganaka Grand Chief Garrison Settee said the events that are happening on the East Coast are an attack on treaty rights.
The Aboriginal treaty rights are constitutionally protected under Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada, and today Canada has broken their own constitution by failing to intervene in the protection of our people in Nova Scotia. That is not acceptable, and we will not stand for it here in Manitoba.
And AFN Regional Chief Kevin Hart called on the European Union to boycott all imports of lobster from non-Migma fishers.
The European Union purchases $175 million of Canadian lobster each and every year. We're going to now tell them to make sure that if they purchase lobsters in the future, that they're certified Migma lobster.
All leaders urged the federal government and RCMP to put an immediate end to what they're calling acts of domestic terrorism against the Migma. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The chief of a Northwestern Ontario First Nation says the federal government has a list of things it needs to do before community members can return home. Earlier in the week, Neskantaga First Nation evacuated about 200 members after the water plant had to shut down due to an unknown substance found in the reservoir. Chief Chris Muniz sent a letter to Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller calling on the federal government to address 7 demands, including running water must be available from taps on a 24-hour basis, and portable water treatment units must be installed in the community to address the ongoing water crisis. Neskantaga has been on a long-term boil water advisory for the past 26 years, the longest in the country's history. The ordeal was often raised in the House of Commons over the past week.
What's happening right now in the First Nation of Neskantaga is an example, a representation of the abject failure of this government and of previous Conservative governments to address a basic question of access to drinking water. The people of this community are being evacuated. Seniors are being evacuated. Chief Munoz describes the situation like this. He says, why is this not a public health emergency? Are we not important? Are we not human? When will the community get access to clean drinking water?
This problem was not created in a day, and it's not going to be resolved in a day. But what I will say is this. Our government has worked hard and has had some success. It's not enough, and I am very happy to recommit today to the effort to ensure all communities in Canada have water fit to drink.
We have to take a break, but coming up, yet another report of abuse when seeking medical care, this time in Manitoba. Stay with us. Welcome back. Starting off in Alberta, where a man has been charged in the death with a teen from Piikani Nation. 16-year-old Tragan Crow Eagle went missing on July 25th. 2 days later, his remains were found on the Piikani Nation. 37-year-old Dustin Big Bull, also from Piikani, was arrested following a police investigation. He is charged with second-degree murder and causing an indignity to human remains. He is now in custody and is scheduled to appear in provincial court next week. Yet another story now on racism in the healthcare system. An elder recently went to a Winnipeg hospital during the Labor Day weekend after feeling ill. Well, there she claims she faced racism from staff and is now speaking out. Daryl Stranger has more.
Bunnabonaby elder Sadie North was with her family during Labor Day weekend when she became sick. Sick enough that her daughter, former MKO Grand Chief Sheila North, had to take her to the Grace Hospital in Winnipeg. Due to COVID restrictions, North had to leave her mother alone at the hospital. Once inside, Sadie's condition worsened.
I could feel that my head wanted to go backward. I was already sick. I even couldn't form my words what to say.
She says the hospital staff were yelling at her and did not assist her in getting to the waiting room area. Eventually, a staff member pushed her into the hall where she threw up twice. North says the next thing she remembers is waking up in a bed with the doctor asking her questions about alcohol use, which she has never used.
I don't use alcohol. I don't use alcohol. He said, are you sure? I said, when you're diabetic and alcohol doesn't mix together. And on. He didn't even look at my infection on my leg. He didn't even look at it or even talk about it.
A bacterial skin infection on her leg turned out to be the cause of her sickness. A Grace Hospital statement provided on behalf of Chief Operating Officer Kelly O'Rourke reads, quote, in collaboration with WRHA Indigenous Health Services, we have been actively engaged with Elder North and her family over the last number of weeks to listen and to understand their concerns. We are sincerely sorry for her experience and have extended that apology to her and her family directly. Sheila North says the apology isn't enough.
I think that people like Dr. Ramadan and the clerk that berated my mom and treated her with such disrespect should be fired. They shouldn't have a job.
The North family is also putting in a complaint with the College of Physicians.
She always, in fact, told all of me and my siblings, don't say anything when people say anything to you, basically telling us just, turn the other cheek. And so this is her motto. She doesn't stand, she lets, things slide because she's very forgiving. But she felt the need to stick up for herself during her stay there.
Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And another Atikamekw person has died in a Quebec hospital. And just like the Joyce Echaquan incident, before his death, he said he was subjected to racism by hospital staff. La Converse, a Montreal-based journalism website, obtained an exclusive interview with Georges Hervé, a Washish, just before he died, and they shared that interview with APTN's Tom Fenario.
Sleep well, Dad. This is the last message Shaunuk Awashish sent his father, Georges Hervé Awashish, because Georges Hervé never woke up. He died 2 hours later. But before that happened, the 53-year-old man spoke to La Converse media from his hospital bed, where he described overhearing healthcare workers laughing about the Joyce Echaquan incident and making what sounds like death threats.
En revenant de la toilette, j'ai entendu des gens parler, des infirmières parler. Après ça, j'ai entendu parler un des infirmières en disant, il dit, on a un Indien ici couché dans la chambre. Il dit, on devrait l'injecter sur le produit toxique. Son problème va être réglé, il marche plus pareil.
Awashish said with the help of family, he immediately left the hospital. But the state of his health forced him to return days later.
Je suis même pas à l'aise, j'ai de la misère à dormir encore cette nuit. Là.
A few days after this interview, Georges Helvé Awashish died at the Chicoutimi Hospital. Citing confidentiality, the hospital says they will not comment on any of its patients, but mentions that an external investigation regarding the alleged incidents is ongoing. Before dying, Awashish said that he wanted to make sure that what he experienced doesn't happen again.
Ben, c'est sûr que moi, je ne laisse pas passer ça, là, à des menaces de même. Je veux plus que ça arrive, ça, à d'autres patients. C'est vraiment décevant qu'est-ce qu'ils jouent de... Je trouve bien décevant.
The funeral for Awashish will be held once his body is returned to his home community of Upitsuwan. Tom Fenario, on behalf of La Converse, Montreal.
Quebec's police watchdog lacks credibility when investigating complaints made by Indigenous people. That's what a report by an independent civilian observer says as she looked at how police forces handle allegations of assault or abuse by officers. APTN's Lindsay Richardson explains how the report's recommendations should help the watchdog better itself.
Quebec's Bureau des Enquêtes Indépendantes, or BEI, is called to investigate when a civilian is injured or killed during a police intervention. In 2020, they have several high-profile cases on their desk, including the police shooting deaths of Chantel Moore and Rodney Levi. Before the BEI was created in 2018, it was the Montreal Police Force, the SPVM, who investigated allegations of police violence. But according to an independent civilian observer, the forces fail to properly support Indigenous victims when a formal complaint is made.
The public at this moment has very little information it can base itself on to know what's going on.
Fanny Lafontaine, an attorney and university professor, says her recent report deconstructs colonialism in policing. It looks at 61 investigations of abuse towards First Nations and Inuit made over a 2-year period. It makes 25 recommendations for improvement in a number of areas.
Transparency, Indigenous representativity, training, etc., information to victim protection. But these great objectives are not made, the proposals are made to fulfill these objectives, but they're very specific. A man section X of that act, a man do this, adopt a strategy in a very specific way to fulfill the objectives.
In most cases examined, it took over a year to decide whether to lay criminal charges, and many times they weren't. For example, in 2019, the officers were cleared of wrongdoing after Jimmy Sivuak Elisialuk died in a Pavernatuk jail cell. Publicly, the BEI stated police complied with their investigation, but recently obtained personal emails say the opposite. Protocol was breached. Lafontaine says investigators need to show their hand.
That's why I call for much greater transparency, because at the moment we don't know anything or almost anything about the means deployed by the BEI to investigate a complaint made by an Indigenous person in Quebec against a police officer.
AFNQL Regional Chief Ghislain Picard says the report is evidence of systemic racism in policing. Quote, even if the government refuses to use this term, it cannot ignore the correctness of Maître Lafontaine's observations and recommendations. She also calls for more sanctions when officers don't cooperate. With Ian Lafrenière, a 30-year police veteran now leading Quebec's Indigenous Affairs portfolio and several reports to draw from, Lafontaine says she hopes Indigenous victims of police violence will soon be afforded a fair process right from the start. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Time for another break, but still ahead, recovering from COVID, economically speaking. Welcome back. Unemployment in the Northwest Territories was already an issue before COVID-19, but when the pandemic hit, a not-for-profit in Yellowknife went into overdrive to help people find who are out of work. Here's Charlotte Moritz-Jacobs with that story.
When Fred Nadeau was laid off in October from his construction gig, he knew what to do.
A shortage of work, so now I'm applying for employment insurance.
And he knew where to go.
I lost my phone, so this is the only place I could go to get information about government and my service, Canada.
The doors to the Career Center in Yellowknife have stayed open the entirety of the COVID-19 pandemic. When Service Canada moved much of their support online, the Career Center became the only computer lab open in the city.
So we are seeing an increase of the unemployed job seeker, typically looking for opportunities, but at the same time requiring assistance to apply on employment insurance and any of the other emergency benefits, and then B, subsequent follow-ups with their bi-weekly reporting that's required.
Gordon Ross, manager of the center, says while government-backed financial relief is good, clients need direct assistance in application support.
Biggest challenge has been around the information dissemination. A simple example would be when an individual comes in and accesses our assistance to apply for a benefit, even knowing the previous CERB, the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, whether they even applied through Service Canada or CRA, because that matters when they apply for their next benefit.
This year, the NWT has suffered 4,000 jobs lost. The service sector accounting for 80%, as tourism and retail sales have plummeted. Finance Minister Carolyn Wozniak told media the number of jobs in the territory is expected to return to 90% of pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year, but the quality of work may suffer.
Although we may have the same number of jobs and bringing us back up to that 90%, the quality of the job may not be the equivalent. So again, whether that's in pay or whether it's in the hours that are available.
Even before COVID-19, visits to the center had been increasing, with half of all visitors being Dene, many looking for job transitions and education as the mining sector winds down. For Fred Nazo, it's a challenging time.
Frustrated, a lot of plannings to make ends meet, and do what I can to earn some money for family.
While he doesn't know if he will be hired back at his old job, he'll press on.
I'm building a cabin, and then I cut woods during the winter time.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Well, that is a wrap on your weekend news. It was a busy week, and if you missed anything, you can get caught up on our website, aptnnews.ca. And make sure you have that APTN News app on your phone if you don't already. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Be healthy and wash your hands.